Thanks very much for having me. It's quite humbling to be in a room with such esteemed people, and thanks for the welcome very much. It's an honour to be here. That place there is Booba Lagoon, so it's my traditional land, northwest New South Wales, and I think that's one of the reasons why I got involved in water, just knowing the story that place has and the significance has to my people. So it's this is gonna. We'll go to the next one, Jace. So I always start off acknowledging the traditional owners of this land and obviously thanking them for allowing the Wurundjeri people and thank them for allowing us to be here. And I always introduce myself. I'm very visual, so I always have a few photos, some old ones, some new ones, and I suppose the current generation, my generation, the kids, the next generation, and the past generation. So, Mum, Nan there in the wheelchair, we lost her this year in January, so she was 97. So she just turned 98. She would have turned 98 yesterday. So, like your family, it was a baby factory. She had 14 kids, so Mum's one of 14. And yeah, just that story inspires me. 14 kids, all no twins. She never lost any kids. She used to go into labour and catch the mail train with the mail bags to Moree, and she used to give birth on the veranda because Aboriginal people back then weren't allowed in the wards. So things like that just inspire me to do great things because of the sacrifices they made. And I suppose it's the sacrifices I make to make sure that the kids have a better place and hopefully they have some water. Next one. This is talking to water people. This is like preaching to the converted. It's who we are. It's a part of us. It's the essence of life. Without it, we don't exist. It's an intricate part of the landscape. It's in all parts. I suppose it's more about the quadruple bottom line rather than the triple bottom line. Which includes cultural, and water when it moves across country doesn't discriminate unless it's pushed or diverted or or channeled or contained. So I suppose it doesn't discriminate when it moves across country, it does what it wants. Next one. And like you mentioned before, Australia's the driest inhabited continent on Earth. We're have the oldest surviving living culture on the planet. We're it. And I suppose that ability to survive on a dry landscape, that's the bit that also amazes me. And I suppose that ability to find and refine water in the land in a dry landscape, that's the bit that really excites me. And I suppose I wanted to learn more about that. And our culture and beliefs have evolved and adapted to climate, water availability, governments and policies. So I suppose we're still here, we've always been here, and we're always going to be here into the future. When you think about some of the demographics during the millennium drought, Aboriginal populations went up in the basin and non-Aboriginal populations went down. So I suppose people were going home because country was sick, and I suppose it was something that doesn't really get promoted as well. Water is protected by law. It's in our art, it's in our song, it's in our dance, it's a part of it, and I think we need to be part of its management. And I suppose the other thing as well is that where there's no surface water, groundwater is the only option for a drink. And I suppose the knowledge of groundwater, that's what got me involved in groundwater as well. So I travelled along a path. I just enjoyed study, and after school I did geology and found myself in the Great Sandy Desert looking for uranium in a national park, and I didn't really connect with that. So I come home and did environmental science, and later on I did a master's in groundwater, and I suppose being one of the few Aboriginal hydrogeologists around the place, I found myself being, I got a bit of 15 minutes of fame and was interviewed and things like that. So, but it's more about the message that I want to, and the story I want to tell about groundwater as well. And I suppose the knowledge of that groundwater that I'm finding and knowledge of water is our validation of water science. But I suppose we don't our culture doesn't fit Western science, and I suppose it always has to be validated. And back in Syro, a couple of the hurdles I found was that I couldn't reference my traditional knowledge because a journal wouldn't accept it. I couldn't get it past peer review. They wouldn't move it any further. So I suppose, how can we get our knowledge validated when it's, we've tested the environment, we understand the environment, and I suppose it's those sort of bits that sort of frustrated me, but I thought I had to go to a warm and fuzzy journal rather than a water science journal. But Aboriginal people are still not part of the Western equation and in identifying when and where water flows in the landscape. We're just not at the table. That's why I suppose I did it. I've infiltrated the system, and hopefully I can bang the table a bit louder. This is an example of a cultural water landscape. So this is in Western New South Wales. These places aren't close together. So the top left one and the bottom one, which is the Barwon Darling River, and they're about 200 k's apart, and the one on the right, the old billabong, so it's a deep billabong in the landscape where the Nyempa mob knew when the river stopped flowing and went all yucky, that they still had these deep water holes in the landscape that they could go to, get a drink, get a feed. So I suppose, but also in the early days, that's where the mission and a lot of people were brought to. So it has sort of contemporary values, but also traditional values as well. But those, well, the one on the left, Byrock and the fish traps, they're linked through a dreaming story. And I suppose that's the bit that got my attention because of those in-stream values being a fish trap, but also the dreaming story and the songline that linked other places in the landscape. So everyone would have learned about Biomese Nunu at school? No? No one? Anyone? So you learn about the pyramids, yeah? Yeah, so these are 3 times as older than the pyramids as an engineering structure. So I suppose that's the bit that I don't get. These sort of places are in our landscape and they're just not celebrated. The next one is Advance Australia Share. Please share. Water and Aboriginal people are connected, but our share of water is not fair. And that's the Advance Australia Fair Share. History tells me land and water was given away in the old days. Our old people were flora and fauna. They're on missions and reserves. They had no rights. They had to get approval to do everything. So when we finally became humans, which was just before I was born, there was no land or little land and water left. So that's sort of where we're at now. And I suppose water sharing in New South Wales, reforms were made to actually separate land and water. So that was part of the National Water Initiative. And I think that was the bit that a lot of Aboriginal people just don't get. Why would you separate land and water? They're intrinsically linked. They have to be together. And I suppose in New South Wales at the moment, we're managed under the Water Management Act and also the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, which is, well, he's uncertain now, I suppose, isn't it? And as I mentioned before, our share of water in that whole scheme of things, because those systems are either fully allocated or over-allocated. And now that we're on our fight for water, that's our next big challenge. In New South Wales, we've got some rights to land through the Land Rights Act, but I suppose some of that land may be useless without the water. And there are some communities that do actually have water, and it's working with them to try and maintain or get them actively in the water market. And I suppose that is our next big challenge I'm calling it Aquanullius. So we've got to try and fight that one because there's no new water. No new water. And I suppose when you hear about the basin plan and what's going to happen and what's not going to happen, I suppose it's going to be even harder for Aboriginal people. This next one I come across while I was doing my master's thesis, and it was, in the end, it was a map that an old man had given an anthropologist in the 50s or 60s, and he was talking him through. He was in desert country, so there's no surface water. And he gave him this spear thrower with all these concentric circles, and they were linked through other lines, so they potentially are walking tracks. And down the bottom is not the scale of the country, it's probably thousands of kilometres rather than 5 centimetres. But I think that's the scale, more the scale of the spear thrower. But in the end, what that was a map of his country, of all those water holes. There we go. Go back. Went to sleep. And in modern sort of context, that could be like a GIS layer. You know, he'd given him all the knowledge of his country, and I suppose that's the other bit, is they're all in language, and if those water holes dry up, that language actually disappears with that water drying up. So I suppose language is also important as well. And with that, you know, that's sort of talking about the fish traps and that sort of knowledge base. I just don't get it. Why does Australia not celebrate our culture? I don't know. Yeah. It's not threatening. I think it's pretty cool. Next one, Jace. I'll give you a bit of... No, oh no, there we go. There we go. So I'll give you a bit of context about what happened in New South Wales. So as of last Friday, I was the team leader of the Aboriginal Water Initiative in New South Wales, and I had to leave because it wasn't a nice place to be for me. And I was sad to leave because I've left the only Aboriginal water unit in the country. And over the last 5 years, I'd built them up. And, you know, the team had built themselves up. They had a lot of capacity. They know water. And I just found out yesterday that all the team just got a note to say that the secretary just approved change management in the department, and their positions could be impacted by that change. So I don't know what the future is for that unit, but I'll be watching very closely, and I suppose me being outside now could be a little bit more dangerous. And I should say that I've taken it upon myself to do something for me. It's a bit selfish, and I've started a PhD as of today. So today was my first day at uni at University of Canberra, so I'm going to look same sort of space, Aboriginal people and water, and hopefully I can build something that has impact in the water space. We also have the Aboriginal, well, that's the objects of the Act, so they're quite strong objects. So if we don't have an Aboriginal unit, I'm not sure how the department's going to comply with its own Act. There's the National Water Initiative. There's a couple of key clauses in the initiative. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan has a strong part there where each basin state has to have sound consultation and have regard and all that sort of thing with Aboriginal people. So I'm not sure if that unit does not exist. I'm not sure how they're going to comply. We had to become experts in everything. We're dealing with experts in their own field, but we had to become experts in everything. So what we had was water sharing plans, so they become statutory instruments on how to share water fairly, I suppose, in a river valley or a groundwater system. There's 22 water resource plans, 13 of those are groundwater, 9 are surface water, 22 risk assessments, 6 floodplain management plans, 9 long-term environmental watering plans, and also water quality management plans. So we were being engaged regularly on all those, but we were dealing with experts in their own field. So we had to sort of become experts, and as it says up the top, you know, we had to walk and talk in two worlds. So we had to try and understand these processes and then go back to community and explain it in a way that could allow them to understand water management in New South Wales. So that was... I think what the team is doing, and hopefully they'll keep doing it in the future, is pretty remarkable. And they're always wearing many hats. This is just a slide I put in on the plane, I think, so I'll see how I get it. Aboriginal people have a cultural obligation to care for country, water and sky. It's in us. We're made to do it. They're all intrinsically connected. We're happy and healthier when we do it. Caring for country and water. But we're just not at the table, and I suppose how do we get our water now with all these systems that are over-allocated or fully allocated? And that's I suppose, a challenge that we're facing right now. What's this doing? Well, it's going to the Abbotsford Wi-Fi. I don't want... Oh, there we go. Next one. These are just some of the water-dependent cultural values that we come across in the landscape, and a lot of them some are quite obvious and some are not so obvious. So I suppose it's these sort of places, the non-physical sites, the spiritual sites, the songs, the dances that link to water, but language, which I spoke about before. So the language connects water to a place and culture to a place, and those people that belong there to that place. And I suppose that if that water disappears, potentially that language actually disappears with it. Resource sites, foods, medicines. So a lot of these are, if they are flora and fauna, I suppose they are water dependent. Artefacts and tools. So men's and women's business is quite crucial as well. So it's not just cultural heritage, it is men's and women's business out there, and the team had a good gender balance, so we were able to deal with men and women's business. Have an attack. Burial places and sites. So we find a lot of our old people are buried in soft riverine sands because it was easy to bury and right next to the river, and something that need to consider in water management, I suppose, as we're now sometimes moving environmental water at higher velocities and bigger volumes to try and get the impact, to get it faster. Potentially those sort of places are the first ones that are going to be eroded, and we're going to have our old people being exposed. So that's something that we need to be a part of as well. This is always I love this photo because it has groundwater bubbling away in the front, it has surface water at the back, and then you've got occupational evidence of Aboriginal people being in that landscape. So this is Western New South Wales again, in a dry part of New South Wales, and I suppose without the water being there, potentially that set of values might not be there. So if we can protect that water through instruments or conditions, then I suppose we're protecting that set of values as well. These are just some more. So teaching sites. So an example might be myself walking down the river with my son and an uncle, and he's talking about places and people and stories and plants, and don't go there, go there. And then all of a sudden we get to the water. Well, it could be that a certain flower has flowered, a plant has flowered, and it's time. That means there's water in the river. Let's go down because the yellow belly are running. So we're walking down there, but we're in a regulated system. Unfortunately, that water's not there anymore because it doesn't meet, the irrigators haven't ordered it or the environment hasn't ordered it. So I suppose, how can we protect that knowledge set through rules? It could be a timed flow. And I suppose that's the other thing in regulated system is making sure that water is there for those cultural values. Massacre sites, unfortunately, they do exist in the landscape. They're sad places, but they are important places, and a lot of those massacre sites are beside wet billabongs, rivers, and I suppose it's quite unfortunate, and I suppose it's something we needed to consider as well. This is killing me. Keeps coming up. Other things might be the cultural economy. So if there is water in the river, there's an opportunity to catch a fish, and that fish could mean something for that person. They could trade it and get something else, or get a few dollars off town. And I suppose the cultural economy is an important bit of Aboriginal people. And I think in some of those decisions that may be made at a basin level, they're not really considered. Those Aboriginal values aren't considered in those decisions because Aboriginal people will be the ones that suffer. Unfortunately, it's having a bit of an attack again. I'm nearly done. Next one. This was another, I had a look at the principles of the water stewardship, and they align with Aboriginal values and the long-term knowledge, and I think there's an opportunity to work together. I don't know, I'm just sort of jumping to conclusions. Is there an Aboriginal person on your board?
We asked you. We asked Phil. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the problems, isn't it? I think people such as yourself just get so overcommitted that I know with FSC, for instance, they thought it was going to be better to have an advisory committee rather than have someone on the board just because people are so busy. But it's something we've been conscious of for a long time, but weren't successful in attracting anyone to the
Oh, maybe give me a call again.
Now you've got a bit more time.
Now I've got a bit more time, that's right. PhDs don't take much time, I heard. But I suppose that's the thing is, like, you know, having a new set of ears, and I think it's a great honour to be able to talk here, and I think it's an opportunity to build that relationship, and, you know, I can see a lot of similarities on what you guys are trying to do, and I think with the value set of Aboriginal people that they can be linked closely, and I think the standard would be more well informed, I think, and I think there could be more outcomes and more benefits, because water is a part of us. Lucky last. Yalu, until next time. Any questions?